Welcome to the Histories of Northamptonshire podcast series, and this episode number 28. Recorded on location, each episode tells the story of one of the many and varied objects which are the focus of the exhibition A History of Northamptonshire in 100 Objects. The exhibition runs at the Northampton Museum and Art Gallery between the 20th of September 2025 and February 2026. Selected by local individuals, heritage groups and the museum's own curators, each object tells a different story from the county's past. And so, to our guest for this episode.
Hello, I'm Michael Marshall and I'm an artefact specialist at Mola.
Michael, what is this particular item that we're talking about as part of the podcast series?
This is a really rather wonderful little toilet set. It's got some tweezers, a little file, a little scoop for cleaning your ears, and a couple of nail cleaners. And these are tools very much like the things that we might have in a little manicure set today, but this dates back to the early Roman period.
So there's a direct parallel between the Iron Age and modern-day Britain, modern-day world now.
Yeah, so this is an object which is very, very familiar to us, and people started using these sorts of objects during the Iron Age, but this is from the very early Roman period, and it relates to a period where there were new ways of looking after your body and new ways of grooming, and when Britain in particular, people were getting into new and exciting fashions and ways of presenting themselves.
Did the Romans bring fashion and grooming to Britain?
Well, they certainly brought new fashions. Mediterranean styles of dress, different clothes and ways of presenting yourself that came from all over Europe and the Mediterranean world. But, we have plenty of evidence that even before then, people in Iron Age Britain had a way of presenting themselves. They liked to show off. They liked to make themselves look beautiful.
So personal appearance and grooming predated the Romans, but perhaps they lifted it to another level by having these kinds of tools.
Yeah, so, the interesting thing about this set in particular is that in many ways this is fancier than what the average Roman in Rome would have. What seems to happen is around the end of the Iron Age, there seems to be a real increased emphasis on looking good in Britain. It seems to become a really important way of showing off and sort of constructing your identity in a way it perhaps hadn't been previously. And so we see lots of innovation happening right here in Britain. And so some of the styles of toilet instruments we get, some of the ways of presenting yourself seem quite distinctive to Britain. And, we even have Roman writers who write about how striking the appearance of British people are, not always approvingly. They sort of write about British women who have too much colour on their cheeks and things like this.
Really?
Yeah.
That's fascinating because we've learnt a few lessons from many, many, many centuries ago.
Yeah, that particular thing is an example not only of sort of casual misogyny, but particularly of a slightly sneering attitude from Roman people towards provincials, the people who lived at the edge of the empire and who were seen as a bit barbarian, a bit different. Whereas the people within Britain who would have owned this object clearly invested a lot of pride in these ways of grooming yourself. And we can see that because this is actually a really sophisticated object. It's a little masterpiece of metalworking. The style of this object is very elaborate. It's got openwork decoration. It's got enamelling on, which was a new technology and one which Britain was particularly famous for. And scientific analysis of the Chatelaine has shown that they actually carefully used different alloys of copper for different components of the Chatelaine, and they would have had slightly different colours.
The Chatelaine, is that separate to the tools you've described?
Yes, so the Chatelaine is essentially this beautiful little pendant, which is quite decorative, and it's got a little bar on it, and all the little tools hang off of it. So it's a way of suspending this set in a very visually pleasing way.
It's a kind of keyring.
Yeah, but it's not a keyring that you'd put in your pocket. It's a keyring that you would want to display. It's showing that you are engaging in these new grooming behaviours. It probably complements your beautifully clean nails, your depilated hairless face, perhaps, your well-kempt hair. It's a way of presenting yourself as quite a sophisticated, clean, fashionable person.
Many men, including me, have got manicure sets like this. They usually come up in a zip-up bag. You don't really flaunt them. You don't display them. This was very different in this particular case. So was it a statement of wealth, of class? Was it a statement of sophistication in the individual?
I think probably a little bit of all of those, actually. During the same period, we do get much simpler sets, which you can't really easily hang on your body. So that perhaps they live in a pouch or live on a surface in your home. But there's a sort of group of these more elaborate, more high status examples, and they seem to really be a distinctive British product during this period. And we get ones that have got a suspension loop like this one, which probably hung off the belt or maybe around the neck as a pendant. And there's another family which are worn as brooches, perhaps on your torso somewhere.
So, Michael, would these things have been exclusively the preserve of one sex as distinct from another?
So the evidence that we have is a little bit tricky. The clearest evidence comes from burials where people have placed similar toilet sets in them alongside the deceased, and it looks very much like both men and women use these sorts of sets. So whilst the ways they use them might be different, might have different ways of styling your body, everyone is interested in access to these tools.
And this particular one, is there evidence that it was actually used, or was it literally a statement item rather than something functional which was used functionally?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I think they're certainly practical objects. You can use them, but certain aspects of the set suggest that statement element is really important. First of all, there's the fact that some of the instruments on the set are duplicated. So there's multiple sets of tweezers. That doesn't really get you anything from a functional perspective. But what it does is it makes the set look fancier and more complicated. And it also allows you to arrange the instruments symmetrically so that the whole thing looks sort of balanced and beautiful as it hangs there. So you can use it, but it really does look good as well.
So was this item found in a grave? Was it found just by happenstance? Can we make any kind of connection there?
Yeah, well, interestingly, this object has probably had quite a long and complicated life. There are hints of it from its style that it might not have been made in Northamptonshire. It may perhaps be made in the area just to the north, perhaps in the north part of the Midlands or even in Yorkshire, that sort of area.
But made in Britain, not made in Rome?
Very much, very distinctively Romano-British craftsmanship. And it was probably made in about the late 1st century AD or the early 2nd century AD. But when it finally came to rest in the ground, it was during the 3rd century at Collingtree in Northamptonshire. And interestingly, the layer it was buried in was around a spring head. So a place where water was bubbling up. And quite often in the Iron Age and in the Roman period, these sorts of places where you get water emerging from the land are considered special or magical. And they're often places for veneration or where gifts to the gods are dedicated. So this object, which may have been over a century old at the time it was buried, may well have been used as a gift to the gods.
And may explain why it was so decorative in its own manufacture.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that certainly might have made it more of a appealing offering. I guess there's maybe the link to the person itself. So it's quite an intimate object. You've used it to groom yourself. Perhaps you've inherited it from a family member. There's all these different aspects to its story. But because it is clearly a valuable thing, relationships with gods in this period are quite transactional. If you give them something better, you probably get something better in return.
You mentioned that this item might not have been made in Northamptonshire, so it might have been brought to Northamptonshire. Nevertheless, would it have been made by the indigenous community, having learnt the skills from the Romans, or might it have been made by somebody from the Roman communities in Britain?
I think it's most likely that it was made by Britain. There are a couple of things that make me think that. First of all, we know that enamelling was known throughout the Roman world as a particular skill that was practiced in Britain. It was a sort of a speciality of British craftsmanship. Some of the aspects of the decoration also draw on earlier Iron Age sorts of styles. The character of the openwork, the sort of petal shape of the motifs at the bottom, they're very much drawn from pre-Roman British styles of art. But of course, this doesn't mean that they don't have all the skills and all the advantages of metalworkers from the Roman world, because we're seeing they're using new alloys, copper and zinc as well as copper and tin. These are new materials. They're very fashionable amongst the Roman community. So I guess it's a way of saying we can make something which is appropriate to our community, but we can use the same shiny technology and the same cutting edge materials as you.
So is this indication of education from what was initially an invading force with the indigenous community working together and then perhaps creating something that would have been desirable and therefore forwarding trade?
Yeah, I think it certainly reflects people working out how to live in a new world where you're a community that's part of a much bigger world. So you're trying to find your own place within a sort of a complicated empire. So you want to express what's unique about being British by using these sort of quite distinctive local products, perhaps. But also, you don't want to be the poor relation. You want to look your best. You want to be using the same fancy materials as everyone else.
Your enthusiasm for the object, Michael, is there for all to hear. What do you feel that this item says about Northamptonshire, given that it was found in Northamptonshire, but, as you say, may not have been made in Northamptonshire? What does it say about this county?
Well, I think there's two really key aspects to that. One of which is that Northamptonshire really sits at this interesting place in Iron Age and Roman Britain. It's sort of very much in the Midlands between, I guess, two different worlds, one concentrated in the southeast and one concentrated perhaps north of the Humber. And we can see here stylistic influences and perhaps evidence of people moving between the two areas. There is a family of other Chatelaines from Northamptonshire itself, and other types of toilet sets like cosmetics grinders and things like that, which have been found going right back into the Iron Age. One of the very earliest of these sorts of objects comes from Hunsbury Hill Fort, which is just a very short distance away from the site at Collingtree. So people in the county are really at the intersection of a lot of different fashions. They're sort of drawing on this stuff. They're perhaps keen to get the best kit and the most interesting stuff from different adjacent areas. So that's one way of reading this toilet set. The other possibility is that if we're right in thinking that the object's been votively placed at this spring, it might be that this place is important enough that it's attracting travellers from elsewhere. Perhaps, somebody's either passing through and has stopped to make an offering, or perhaps even somebody has chosen to visit Northamptonshire specifically to go to the spring head at Collingtree to lay an offering.
Absolutely fascinating. Who could have thought that Northamptonshire would be a centre of not only aesthetic appreciation but also personal grooming as well? Michael, thank you so much for shedding light on something that many people won't have considered about Northamptonshire, but will do now. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you for listening to this Histories of Northamptonshire podcast. If you would like to find out more about the objects or listen to other episodes in the series, go to www.northamptonmuseums.com. Alternatively, you can visit the Northampton Museum and Art Gallery, where you can see the A History of Northamptonshire in 100 Objects exhibition for yourself. The Histories of Northamptonshire project is funded by Arts Council England as part of the National Portfolio Programme.